Oh yeah, here we go, practice acquisition. There are pitfalls throughout the entire process. Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to another episode of Dental Acquisition Uncensored. I am super stoked about this episode. We've got a lot of great things. We discuss and break down how an LOI works, really the whole purpose of it, and what the legal ramifications are of going through the process, and how mechanically you need some key factors in an LOI. But a lot of it also is fluff, and you'll hear some of that in the episode. We discuss kind of all the things that you need to be thinking about as you approach a seller and how to get into their head in a good way. The strategy in how to win a practice when you're making an offer. How can you differentiate yourself from the rest of the buyers? So stay tuned on that. That's more towards the end of the episode, and there's some really good nuggets in there that I think you'll take away a lot of value add there. Big picture, folks, thanks for being a part of this program. Startup Uncensored was a great program, and check that out if you're heading down the startup path. But Acquisition Uncensored is running through top to bottom, how to buy a practice from start to finish. So let's get into it. LOI, letter of intent, breaking it down. Let's go.
Acquisition Uncensored. The truth when buying and selling a dental practice. And now your host, Michael Dincio.
All right. Welcome. This is another episode of Dental Acquisition Uncensored. My name's Mike Dincio, founder of Next Level Consultants and your host for this program. Super excited about this episode because I am interviewing one of my favorite people in the world, potentially the world. Go back with this guy 10 plus years. We interviewed him on Startup Uncensored on a different topic, but we got a legend in the industry in the house today, Ali Oromchian with Dental Medical Counsel. Welcome to the program, my brother.
Thanks, Michael. Thanks, buddy. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited that you're doing this on the acquisition side. It's awesome.
I know. I mean, the other podcast, obviously, as most of my listeners know, is all about startups, but you can't do a startup podcast without doing an acquisition podcast because they're
100%.
They flip-flop. You start an acquisition. Oh, that's not working out. Let's go startup. Oh, the startup, I found a practice. Let's buy it instead. So it literally happens like that, right? So today's topic, let's get into it, is the letter intent. And Ali, of course, is a dental attorney in one of my, like I said, my friends, but more so just a wealth of knowledge. He's an attorney in California, but works dental deals all across the country, lots of states. And again, the topic today is the LOI, the letter of intent, and we're going to break down what it is, what the process of it is, but most importantly, like how do you utilize that opportunity to win the deal? So, but before we get into it, Ali, give me a little bit about you and your firm and what you're all about, man.
Sure. Thanks, Michael. So as you mentioned, I'm a dental attorney, and so this is what I do: help doctors all across the country buy offices or do startups. We do lease negotiations, employment law, of course, and estate planning. I kind of fell into this, as you know, because my wife is a pediatric dentist here in the Bay Area, and I started, when I worked at a bigger firm, started doing work for her classmates and her co-residents and whatnot. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so much more fun, and I'm enjoying, working with this group so much more than, the big corporations and whatnot. And so made the jump, and it's been super fun ever since. I have some lifelong friends who started off as clients, and I get to meet people like you who I've known forever, and ever since that lunch in Blackhawk.
I know. Gosh, that was 10 years ago. How many deals do you think you have done in your career? If you were to guess.
Oh my gosh. I wouldn't even be able. We do on average about 250 or so deals a year, and so we just celebrated our 15-year anniversary. So
probably close to 1,000, man.
I know.
Probably close.
Yeah.
That's insane.
It's insane. It's
you had
crazy.
to add,
yeah.
You had to add it up. All right. So, letter of intent, LOI. So we've worked our way through the process, as you know, if you guys started with us in episode 1, and now we're at a place where I just interviewed all of the practice brokers. We talked about how to find a practice, talked about lending. Now we found our practice, whether it was through the broker or it's through finding it organically, and we need to make an offer, right? That's what we're doing. Mm-hmm. So it's called a letter of intent because it's an intent to purchase. Walk us through what it is. Like, what's the letter of intent? What does it stand? Like, what's the point of it?
Yeah. And it's important, I think, for your listeners to also know that it goes by a couple of different names, right? The letter of intent is the most common one, but sometimes some brokers or some people call it a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, or, they have a variety of different names. But like you said, the goal of the letter of intent is super simple. It's to show your interest to the seller that you want to buy this practice upon these agreed terms. And so usually it's all business terms. There's some legal terms in there, but really most of it is business terms regarding how much you're going to pay and when you're going to pay it. And we'll get into all of that. But it's the first step of getting a deal done. Now, you might say, why would you ever do that, right? Why would you ever want to take this extra step? Well, it's really a way of minimizing your legal costs if the seller or if you're a seller, aren't really serious about the transaction, right? Because if you can't agree on the business terms, then what's the point, right?
Yeah.
So
what is the point? And I always say, like, when you're looking for practices, you're like on Tinder. You're swiping right, swiping left, trying to figure out, let's get some coffee dates going on.
Right.
Then the LOI is more like, hey, I like you. We've gone on some coffee dates and some other situations as well, potentially. And now we're exclusive.
Right.
But still very much break upable, if that's a 100%. Terrible word to use. Yeah. We can break up. So let's say we do an LOI, Ali, like, what does that breakup look like? Is it a big deal? Is it not a big deal? Like, what's that process?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question.
Yeah,
it's a super good question, because this is actually where the first misunderstandings happen with an LOI. So an LOI is does not, like you said, does not mean that you are getting married at the end of the transaction, right? And so although you are going to be only working with this seller if you're the buyer, right? It is not something that binds you to purchase it. Okay.
The LOI isn't.
The LOI is. Yeah, exactly. It's not binding, right? So you'll hear that word. It's non-binding, which means that you can walk away from the transaction. However, everything that's in the LOI typically transfers to the legal documents that are going to be created. So one thing that I hear a lot across the country from buyers, because as you know, Michael, what we do is we have a reputation for representing buyers and helping them become entrepreneurial in their endeavors. And that's exactly right. Yeah. And that, well, we hear brokers and sellers sometimes tell these buyers, just sign the LOI, get your offer in, and then we'll deal with it later. But that really defeats the purpose of the LOI. And so you should really take it more seriously and look at it and say, okay, how much am I willing to offer? Assuming all the financials that I have, and sometimes the financials aren't very much, right?
Right.
Especially if you're dealing with a broker initially, you have some basic data, but you submit the offer with Mike's help, and then once you have that, then you move to the next stage. But you got to make sure you're comfortable with the sale price, with the closing date, all of that.
Yeah, you're leading the witness right now. What are the key? Yeah, this is perfect. What are the key things? Because it's not binding,
Right.
but you just said it perfectly. The business piece of it. Like, what's the point of getting married if you don't know what the terms are? Like when you're dating,
Right.
do you want kids?
Exactly.
Right? Do you are you know
Where do
how
you
much
wanna
money
live?
do you
Yeah,
make?
yeah.
Yeah, where do you want to live? So like, what are the main pieces in your mind? If it's not the legal crap, or it's going to have some of the
It's
legal
gonna have a little
crap,
bit.
but what are like the main things? Like if a broker is telling our audience, just sign this and let's go, like in your mind, like what are the nuts and bolts, the basic stuff?
Yeah. So there's three portions in my mind of the LOI, and they go from like super obvious to less obvious. Okay. So the first is the purchase price, of course, right? That's the most obvious one. How much are you going to pay for this practice? And like I said, that portion needs to be discussed with you, as the consultant, so that you can sort of analyze it, and maybe with a bank too, where they can kind of give you an impression of what this practice is worth. Now, they're not going to do a valuation for you as the buyer, the bank won't, but with their guidance and also, Mike's guidance, you can kind of come to an agreement on, okay, this is what I think this practice is worth, right? So that's the obvious one. The second group is, what are you actually buying, right? And so this becomes a little bit less obvious because everyone's like, well, I'm buying this dental practice. Okay, well, but what does that mean, right?
Yeah.
Are you buying the charts? How many years of the charts are you buying? Are you buying 3 years, 7 years, or all, right? And each one of those has different repercussions, of course, right? Are you buying all of the equipment, or are you buying some of the equipment? I mean, I have had buyers enter into a transaction and then the seller says, well, I'm going to sell you everything except this CAD cam. I promised my buddy I'm going to sell it to him. Or if they're like an endodontist, this is my favorite microscope I've had since, residency. I want to keep that. It's like, what are you buying? Right. So I think that's the second grouping, right? Like, what are you actually getting? And this is actually, Michael, getting even more interesting because more and more people are using their name as their domain name, right? For their like websites and emails. And so the question is, are they actually selling that to you? Are they selling their name to you? And for the most case, that's they're not, right? They're going to just let you use it for a while. And so anyways, that's the second category. And then the third category, which I think is the least obvious to buyers, but some of the most important, is the contingencies, right? Like, you should have, as a buyer, a financing contingency, right? Because there's no guarantee. And Mike, you and I can talk for hours about banks pulling approvals and things of that nature, and usually it's not their fault. Usually it's like something funny that comes up in the seller's history or the buyer's history that like causes the deal to go kind of wonky. But you should have a banking, lender's contingency. You should have a landlord contingency. Because landlords are getting kind of crazy and sometimes crazy. Yeah. I mean, we've seen landlords ask for like 20% increases in rent from the seller to the buyer just because they know they can. I mean, crazy stuff like that. Buying the equipment lien free. I have a deal now. Actually, it's one of the doctors that you're working with. I think the seller had a sale price, which was like, a high sale price, but that was okay. Our buyer was willing to pay for it. And then at the last second adds on that the buyer also has to pay off the debt on the equipment in addition to the sale price. And their consultant kind of, was recommending that, which is ridiculous, right? It's ridiculous. And then they wanted the buyer to also pay for which is really funny, for training on some new equipment that the seller bought on his own. Like, oh, I'm going to send you to so-and-so facility to be trained, so you got to pay for it yourself. It's like, It's like, what are you talking about? Like ridiculous stuff. So anyway, so the contingencies are super important and allows you to kind of get out if you need to. You know what I mean?
I love that. So 100%, the purchase price is obvious, the obvious thing, like you said. These buyers, that's the easiest one. What about date? Date is kind of an important one too, right?
Yeah, the closing date, absolutely.
That's one of those more obvious ones too. Is like,
that usually goes with the purchase price. You're right. Yeah.
Purchase price, right? Okay. And what are you buying? That's that is so key. I've had nightmare stories where the exhibits towards the end have assets missing, and especially the practice owners that own multiple practices.
Right.
Folks, I mean, when someone owns multiple practices, my favorite thing is this little guy for the YouTube watchers, is a phone, because you get to take pictures and videos and all kinds of stuff when you're doing that chart audit to make sure that, hey, what do you mean that's not included? I had a seller take a autoclave right after COVID. It was the only autoclave. Folks, we are in a pandemic. You kind of need an autoclave. You kind of need one. Anyways, so I love that. So what's involved? Okay.
You'll love this. I had a ortho practice sell to my client, and it was like a sports themed ortho practice, right? Like, jerseys and all this stuff. And we got involved super late, but the seller did not want any of the sports themed stuff in there to remain with the buyer, not even for like a limited amount of time. So on the closing date, they took all of that away. Like, so patients walked in the next Monday and the office was bare.
Oh,
right,
man.
So
come on.
And it's like,
it's a theme. It's a theme.
Exactly. And I was like, I get it. You're Joe Montana, signed jersey. Like, you want to take that home. I get it. Fine, but at least let the buyer have an opportunity to replace it. You know what I mean? And so like those kind of things are just little things that make a big difference.
Okay, so I hear that. I will say that most of my buyers are really nervous about the LOI because it's very contractually, it's a terrible word, looking. It's even when I sell my LOI, the seller sometimes sends it to their attorney because it looks very legal. 100%. and it is, and you should. But it's a scary document. Let's talk about brass tacks, though. Like, I've had attorneys tell me that they will look at an LOI and definitely reference the LOI. Mm-hmm. But if the LOI is not really what they want it to say or whatever, as the attorney, you get to scramble that later if you want to. Am I wrong about that or no?
No,
I mean, you can always go back on it, but...
You can go back on it if you have to. I personally don't love changing the LOI terms unless we find something that's contrary to what was said in the beginning when our buyer got into the LOI. Now, of course, if I wasn't part of the LOI, totally different story, right?
Right. Totally That's what I mean. That's what I mean. Yeah. Because you, as the attorney coming in later, and I know that's a different episode. What I'm trying to say is the LOI doesn't chisel stuff in rocks. We're not. Right. The purchase and sale is going to do that. Now, do I think that you should go into an LOI, be really aggressive, and have the intent to change it later? That's not what I'm saying. Right. But what I am saying is the practice brokers oftentimes use it as a formality just to get the deal moving. That's kind of an extreme.
Right.
And then there's probably the attorney. We got one on the horn today. That's going to be the other extreme of get your shit dialed in. Right. But then there's probably some middle ground too, folks. Right. And so I guess what I'm trying to convey is that an LOI, get the three parts that Ali is talking about here. What are you buying? How much? What's the time frame? And what are the contingencies? And then move on and let the attorneys work out the legal stuff. Am I crazy here by saying
No,
that out loud?
you're spot on. You're spot on, because here's the thing. It's a very competitive environment, right? It's a very competitive environment. So you want to use the LOI as an opportunity to, in essence, be selected as the buyer. Now, in my opinion, there's a couple of things as a buyer you should always do when you're ready to buy an office. Okay. So even before we get to the LOI, right? So like step one is, talk to, Mike, and make sure you've got your team ready, right? And so who's your team? Get a lender approved, right? So you don't need 5 lenders, right? You just need one initially, just to sort of get you pre-approved, so you can tell the sellers and the broker, hey, I'm approved by someone. And get your lawyer, right, on board. And so if you have someone like me helping you, then the sellers realize, hey, this guy or this gal is serious, right? They've got their consultant.
That's
right?
the key.
Yeah, exactly. It is the key, because there's so many window shoppers out there. And by the way, not that there's anything wrong with window shopping. Like, everyone does it, right? You look around, you get a sense of what the market is like, where you want to be. You start talking to, Mike about, looking at different practices. You start kind of dancing around. And then finally, though, when you get serious, you're like, okay, you know what? I want to get to financial independence. I want to build wealth. I want to become an entrepreneur. Then you don't want to go to a seller without your team, right? You don't want to say, oh, you know what? I've got some names. I'm going to go interview some banks and some lawyers and some CPAs. No. You got to say, hey, I got Ali as my lawyer. I've got so-and-so as my bank. I've got Mike as my consultant, and I've got a CPA. Mm-hmm. Boom.
Yeah.
You're ready to rock.
Because I like that, because you're not just swiping right and left like we talked about.
Right.
Right now, you have the intent of getting exclusive with somebody. That's your intent. And it tells, and we kind of covered that up to this point with all the brokers and like how to approach a broker. We just got out of those episodes, but Ali's 100% right. Getting that team dialed in, and just to stress that point, it's that brokers always have, you guys don't realize, they have people calling them every day, like hundreds, frankly, inside 3-month period, hundreds of buyers calling them. What do you have? What do you have? And they only want to take people seriously. And the way you could express that you're serious is having that team on your side.
Yeah.
Okay. 100%. So, okay. I love what we've covered so far. To me, the brass tacks of this entire episode isn't necessarily the LOI. I mean, it is. That's the whole purpose of this episode. But uncensored style and straight to the brass tacks here is, we are in a world where there is no practices to purchase. And I say that like there's tons of buyers and very little practices to purchase. So the supply and demand is just whacked out. And it has been that way for a long time. Am I right about that, Ali? Like, can you remember a time where it was a buyer's market? Can you remember a time?
No. I mean, not in the last at least 12 to 15 years has it been a buyer's market. I mean, almost never. Yeah.
So you've got a lineup of buyers looking at practices, and it's really who's the first one that can get in and start getting serious. So that's where the LOI is key, is like, get that LOI in quick. And a lot of buyers don't want to do that because they're nervous about the ramifications. Right. So now that we have kind of not scared people to send an LOI in, that the attorney can still rework it if you made some stupid move. How do we get our buyers, our clients, Ali, in position quicker, faster, easier? Like, I guess, what's the strategy on the LOI, or just the process in general, to get these guys in a place where we're looked at more seriously, I guess?
I think, that's an awesome question, because the human psychology of an LOI is very important, right? It's kind of like what you were saying. I love that analogy because I've used a very similar one, which is, it is like dating, right? And an LOI is kind of like almost like a promise ring, right? It's like, hey, we like each other. We've talked to each other. We're ready to, kind of take it to the next level. and we're going to go, and here's my promise to you, right? And to that effect, you've got to be ready to kind of open yourself up and disclose some stuff. And so psychologically, when you submit an LOI, a strong LOI with a team, what it does is it tells the seller, this could be my guy or gal, right? This could be the transition. Now, there's a seller psychology that every buyer needs to keep in mind as well, right? And that is
folks, listen, this is the gold here. Understanding the other side. Go, Ali.
Exactly. Yeah. No, understanding the other side's mindset and psychology in a transaction is hugely important. Here, this is where you're buying someone's baby, right? They have worked and had a relationship with their practice and all the employees in their practice for 10, 20, 30 years. And now they're going to hand this off to you, right? To you. And so to hand it off to you is a big deal. And also remember, it's not just handing it off to you. Of course, they're getting money for it, but also it's a legacy thing, right? You know, they've built their name and their reputation, and now they're handing it off. They want that to be to someone who's strong and whatnot. And so when you have, now we go back to sort of what we were talking about earlier. You have your team ready, right? You know you're pre-approved with a bank, so there's nothing in your credit and stuff that you don't know about. You've got Mike looking at the financials, so you have a sense because you've window shopped a little bit, but now you have a sense of where the price should be for this practice, right? And then you get this practice that you really want because of the location, patients, whatever. And now you're ready to go, and you're like, okay, I'm going to put a strong offer. Now, there's two ways of submitting an offer. You can come to us, and we usually turn around LOIs in 1 day because they're that important, right? Yeah. And so usually it's 2 pages, short, sweet, and we go, right? Or you can use the broker, if there is a broker's LOI, right? They usually have their forms, it's already pre-filled, and we revise some minor things in there, change the price, and then off we go, right?
Can I touch on that, Ali, just a little bit? You said 2 really good things. I'm going to say the first is using the broker's LOI can be problematic, folks, can be, but not massively. But like, I just looked at a broker's LOI and I could see the percentages that they've changed in the seller's favor. So get an Ali or myself involved fairly quick before you're submitting any LOIs. If you're going to use the practice broker's LOI, fine. Ali and I are probably okay with doing that, but at least have us look at it, because there's some things in that you might not be okay with. And Ali needs to explain that, and I need to explain that, right?
100%. Yeah, 100%. I mean, remember what we said, guys, about it being non-binding, about all these other things are what they typically are. But like any contract, an LOI could become binding. They could have a deposit, as I've recently seen, that's non-refundable. Right? Like, I would never let you sign that, nor should you ever sign that, right? Like there's just no reason to do that, but it could happen. And so just because we're saying it's non-binding typically doesn't mean that the one that you get from the broker or the seller is non-binding. Right? Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. And so if you get it, great. We're not going to create our own, right? Because we want to put you in the best position to be selected as the buyer. But we are going to revise stuff slightly to make it more advantageous. But I think the mistake that some lawyers do and some consultants do is they go in and they redline the whole LOI, changing sentences for stylistic reasons and all this kind of crazy stuff. And
it's silly. So that was a bit confusing. I want to, not confusing in how you said it, I just want to say it in a different way just so it sinks in. That there could be some things in the LOI that are binding. That's what Ali was saying. Yeah. If you're not careful. But it's meant to be kind of that promise story, the promise ring. That's old school, Ali. The promise ring. That's old school, buddy. But I love it. I love it. Ali's he's a romantic type. We can tell. We already can tell. So yeah, be careful because there definitely could be some things. So have professionals look at it. The other thing that you said there, Ali, was to tap into the legacy. That was one of that. Okay, so we're talking about like strategies into winning a practice. There isn't a better strategy than connecting with the seller in a human level or clinical level. I'll say that again, a human level or clinical level or both outside of the business terms that we were just talking about. Like Ali's going to do a great job. I'm going to do a great job mechanically from the business perspective, but there is a way for you to somehow tap into their Instagram or Facebook page and find some connection. Or maybe like my buyer that I just got off the phone with got to go look at the practice for the first time and the seller was there to greet them and they spent an hour together. I'm like, we've got this thing because they connected on a human level and clinical level.
Right.
Maybe it is sending your portfolio with your offer or writing a personal letter with your offer. Because if there's a way that you can separate yourself from just the three parts that Ali just described, you got to have those: purchase price, what are you binding contingencies? That's going to protect you, boom, boom, boom. But if there's a way for you to connect somehow to make that seller like you more, that's a winner. Can you think of anything else that's interesting?
No, you summarized it perfectly. That's exactly right. I mean, it's this human connection part of it. It's the business side will come, but the human connection is huge. It's huge. And and if there isn't a broker, if there is not a broker, the emotional side of this becomes even more important because one of the great things that brokers do in transactions, they kind of get a bad rap sometimes, and some of them deserve it, but a lot of them don't.
Totally.
But a lot of them don't, and they do a really good job of setting the stage for the seller to actually transfer, because they go through this roller coaster, right? They're excited to sell because they're finally transitioning, but then they're getting fearful of what am I going to do the day after it's sold, right? I don't have anything. I don't have any place to go. I don't have anybody to talk to, that kind of thing. And the brokers help them through that emotional roller coaster. And just as we would help you buyers through the same thing, right? Fear of failure, fear of getting such a large loan, fear of, the unknown, right? And so,
or the clinical skills. I've had people freak out about maybe 100%. I'm not ready clinically.
Yeah. It's funny, Mike, you see this. I mean, 2/3 of deals right now are transactions versus startups, right? Because a lot of people believe that having immediate cash flow from existing patients is really a good thing. And it is. It's a wonderful thing. But the problem you have with transitions, acquisitions, if you're not careful, and I think this is where the LOI starts mitigating some of these risks, is there's a lot of skeletons that could be buried in a dental practice. And you need to do your due diligence, from a consulting perspective, and look at all the data and make sure it's all clean, and all of that, helps you ensure and minimizes your risk. And it all starts with the LOI.
It does. We've hit some really good things here. Let's talk about the last maybe few minutes here. Some things that can differentiate you from the rest of the sellers mechanically. Obviously, price is one of those things. You could offer more cash. Got to make sure that the bankers can actually give you that money. That's key. If they can't, where are you going to get that money? It's going to be your own pocket. Are there any? So that's the easy one. You said the first part is the obvious ones. Right. Date. Can we fast track and get you sold, seller? That's going to be good. Can I give you $10,000 more than the asking? That's an obvious one. Is there anything mechanically, Ali, anything mechanically from a LOI that could potentially give somebody extras?
I think keeping the LOI straight and simple for someone to understand, I think, is the key, right? If you have your team and you're giving them a competitive offer, and then you give them an LOI that's straight away, very simple to read. They don't think it's going to be lawyered up, right? It's not like they need a PhD to figure out kind of what's in there. It just makes that first step easier and puts you in the driver's seat, right? And I'll tell you, there are some, there are some brokers who will not work with certain buyers because of the lawyer that they have, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't blame
and buyer rep. And buyer reps,
yeah. I mean, I don't blame them, right? I don't blame them because sometimes, it gets too lawyered, up, and there's a way of finessing the buying process so that you get what you want, you minimize your risk, and get the deal done, and not, kind of create all this animosity, right? Create all this animosity. I mean, there are lots of groups who do, right? To justify a lot of different things, they create a lot of animosity. It sounds good, right? And they scare everyone, but they're not really truly doing their job.
Now you're in my head, Ali, because that's next level. I say, like, when I'm talking to a buyer, am I against using the broker's LOI? I'm not, because they're used to that language. And if it comes back on their letterhead, you actually will probably have a better chance at winning it. Now, Ali and I are saying, make sure what's in it's not going to get you.
Right.
But when we use, I'm not gonna lie. In my earlier days as a buyer's rep, I sent the long LOI with the next level logo at the top.
Right.
I did. Has that stung me? It has. Today, I'm sending shorter LOIs with the help of Ali. If Ali's involved, I'm definitely using his. But guess what? There is no next level consultants logo at the top of my LOI anymore. Why? Because we might not want to tell the other side that we got Mike Dincio and Ali Oromchian on the side, right? So now you're starting to get into the strategy stuff. Is like, hey, once they accept the LOI, then we can tell them Mike Dincio and Ali is involved, right? Okay, so folks, get into it. Think about that, because if the seller is looking at 5 other LOIs, do you think they're going to accept the one that's twice as long and with next level consultants at the top? Come on.
Yeah.
Let's right?
Yeah, that's exactly.
Is that it?
You just got to be smart. Yeah, you got to just be strategic, and you got to be smart, and all of those things, all of those things matter when you're in a bidding contest for a good practice. And to your point, a lot of brokers have a lot of practices for sale, but that doesn't mean they have a lot of good practices for sale. And so the ones that are good are the ones that are going in fast, right? And sometimes, by the way, for all of you buyers out there, they're not even hitting the market, right? They are being sold to, they consider them like pocket listings, right? They've got an amazing practice, and they've got 5 amazing people or 3 amazing people ready to rock and roll, and they will move forward. And I'll tell you, one of the things we've done is, we've got a really great reputation with and relationship with a lot of these good brokers around the country who understand that, and they will a lot of times select our buyers as one of those pocket listings for the practices that are just really good, because they just know that the LOI is going to be well thought out. It's going to be straight. It's going to be good. And then the deal is going to focus on the most important things to get the deal done. And sometimes the deal falls apart because we find out something that is crazy and we can't do the deal, but I think we all know, to build wealth and get to financial independence, you got to own your own practice. So
I'll end it with this, Ali, that you said something that was really good, is like, get your team involved and what you need to do, right? And having that team is super important. I'll end it with this, that your team don't have an unhealthy skepticism of your team because they are pro deal. Sometimes buyers get this feeling of like, why is everybody pushing me? Or why is it's good to have a deal team pro deal. And like strategies of taking my logo off my LOI, the reason because I want you to win it. Like we all want you to win it. Now we'll be the first to tell you. Exactly. This is not a good idea. Right. We're not moving on this deal. Ali and I have killed many deals. That's not a problem for us.
Yeah.
But
we have to,
your team, you have to. But your team should be pro deal, right? Like you don't want deal killers out there.
No. I mean, look, it's kind of like, to use that same analogy you were using earlier, right? You know, if you tell your friends, if you tell 5 friends you're getting married to, you know, to this incredible person you just met and you have a relationship with, you don't want your friends to say, "Oh, you guys are going to get a divorce. This is terrible. You shouldn't even get married. Like, you're going to have kids with this person. Like, they're going to be the ugliest kids in town."
Have you met their mom?
like that's not the kind of friend you want, right? Mm-hmm. You want someone who's going to support you and push you and encourage you. And then if they do see something, they raise their hand and they're not afraid to tell you, "Hey, by the way, you know, this person hit on me at your birthday party last night, so maybe you shouldn't marry them." You know what I mean? And, you know, and like that's a good friend, right? And that, I think, to your point, is your advising team has to advise you with the idea that the deal is going to happen because that's what you want, clearly, because you're in the market to buy a practice. But as soon as something happens that's not good, you got to have a deal team that raises their hands and says, "Hey, we need to look at this and we need to work together to resolve it and find a solution," right? And so, yeah, I think you bring up a really, really good point, you know. So
hey, I mean, that's what we're doing here, I guess. Yeah. That great episode today. We discussing the LOI strategies to win deals, the nuts and bolts of the LOI. Ali Oromchian is available to you folks. His work ethic is unparalleled. We're gonna have all of his info below here in the show notes. Remember to like us, review us, share the information to your friends. Thank you, Ali, for being a part of this. As always, my friend.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. This is always fun, and you're doing a great job with these podcasts. And it's a blessing to be part of it. So thank you, buddy.
You're welcome, buddy. We're having a good time. Well, without further ado, take off. Have a good day, and we'll see you on the next episode. See you guys.
Bye, everyone.
Tune in next time for another truth-filled episode of Acquisition Uncensored. We want to hear from you. Interact with your host, Michael Dincio. Follow us on Facebook and YouTube. Comment and subscribe.